YouTube, and we'll be live in Facebook as well. And so, hello Ashok, my friend in the law. How art thou and
How are
our
you?
parents?
I'm actually pretty tired today. I've been, yeah, the last 2 days I've been on shooting jobs, and my call times were super early in the morning. Like I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to go to the location and stuff. Today I finally got to sleep in, but I'm still kind of like
Nice.
a little bit sort of, you know, out of it from having 2 very long days and early mornings in a row. I'm getting older now. I can't handle it anymore.
This may be the perfect headspace for us to do this because you're in between
Yeah.
in between realms. What were you shooting? Is it a TV series, an ad, or a film?
The first one was a Lexus car TVC.
Hmm.
So I wasn't the main role.
Yeah.
I just had the side role. I was like playing a photographer, shooting someone, and then this new Lexus car comes driving by, and we go, "Oh, look, it's a car," you know. um, um, and then the next day was a different job actually, and I was just it's for some tech company that's doing sort of video conferencing tech. So it was like sort of a more like a corporate video for them, like to display how it all works. What was really creepy? It was like we're in a conference room, and then there are like video monitors at the front where people teleconference in. But the creepy part was that there were two like cameras that looked a bit like surveillance cameras mounted on top of the conference screen, and they would move to face you, like sensing the sound. So whenever someone spoke, these two cameras would move and face you, and they looked like two big brother eyes, like just zeroing in on
Ah.
you whenever you opened your mouth. It was really creepy,
I
actually.
hope I hope it's not like a red flashing and goes, "Hello, Dave."
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Okay,
but yeah,
so since the last time we did this, we've sent each other some things to read, and yeah, we can discuss that. But to start with, I'd like to read you a poem I wrote back in 1997.
okay,
And weirdly
great.
enough, we'll see, but in my mind, after I read this, you would understand why I wanted to read this because I think at least it could relate to one of the Gendlin papers you sent me. You'll
Okay,
recognize some references.
yeah.
Okay, crossing. As I crossed the bridge into the unknown, I wondered. As I kept in step with her stride, an occasional look into her innocent face, trying hard to capture the angel from her voice, the sound of a well-crafted flute. Unlike the ones before, I offered not to carry her things, did not even hold her arm as we skipped over potholes and cement rocks. I simply allowed her to walk and followed her stride as I blubbered about Carl Jung, the inner child, the shadow and individuation, B.F. Skinner and his pigeons, Pavlov and his salivating dogs.
Mhm.
She spoke of keeping files, interviewing applicants, probing character. I should have listened more. She said she does not read poetry of people she does not know. Find it hard to write poetry of her own, as she asked me to let her have the side of the walk beside the jeepneys and trucks spewing carbon monoxide while waiting impatiently in line. She'd rather have that than risk falling into dark, murky waters of the Pasig River, where the almost full moon has made a clone of itself. We could have walked miles for hours till we reached Marikina or Antipolo. Still, I would have been left wondering. That is, until I pluck the fresh lotus from her hair, taste each budding silky petal as I tear them open, throwing it into the murky rivers where together with the moon it will blossom forever. or until I pluck my eyes, tear out my tongue, sand my skin in the rough pavement, and do nothing but listen.
Very nice.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah,
get?
I
Did you see some
see
of the
the,
references?
yeah, definitely some of the references to Gendlin there. Or Gendlin.
Yeah,
I think Gendlin is
gently.
the right part. But I'm used to saying Gendlin because, you know, as when you read it first, you know, that's how you say it to yourself. And then you hear it said by someone who knows, and it's different, but you've already developed the habit. So, but anyway,
True.
yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, so maybe one of the things I remember from reading one of the papers was he compared Skinner, the reward and punishment
Yeah,
experimental psychologist, with the ethologist.
right,
Yeah,
who's in the lab, who's studying like the sensory response to stimulus,
yeah,
the pain and pleasure response. You know, compared to the ethologist who is studying the same creature but in the wild,
yeah,
just observing their behavior as they would in their normal natural environment. Yeah,
yeah, and not only
yeah,
that, in the Skinner case, they narrowed it down to one aspect, right? It's conditioning, right? Whereas in the ethologist,
yeah,
they look at the whole thing. They're not just looking for one aspect of how these animals behave. So I, and then
right,
and I like the way he described it beautifully, wherein so the those in the Skinner side think that what the ethologists are doing is too all over the place. You know, it's not.
yeah. You
They're not
can't like.
precise. Yeah,
Yes, you can't sort of create some kind of hypothesis and come up with predictions like you can in a lab, sort of
yeah.
thing. Yeah,
And then he goes to ask, but yeah, I forgot. Another thing that came out of that was the surprising fact that because Skinner was arguing that everything is learned, right? You can. I think he was
yeah.
the guy who even wanted to put his child in a box so that so give me any child. And yeah, I think he was that guy. That
Yeah,
was yeah,
I
yeah.
seem to remember hearing, you know, pretty far out stuff about Skinner and
Skinner
his
box, you know the Skinner box.
behavior.
I don't know if it's urban legend, but he
Yeah,
arrogantly says, "Give me any child, and I will make them geniuses, or I could turn them to whatever." But then the ethologists put animals in the wild that never learned anything, and immediately they do something that they never seen before, right? So that was the argument,
yeah,
and then there was the argument: Is it the same mouse? And then I think Gemlin wrote, but the lab mouse is not even the same mouse because these lab rats were bred for laboratories. So it's not really, you know what I mean? It's even a different creature.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, what he's talking about is that there is a clash between um, like what we want an empirical science to be,
Mm-hmm.
to somehow refer to an objective world, and then the assumption of that in that is that um, an objective world is sort of one monolithic system. Yeah,
Mm.
but then we can see that like when the ethologist and the Skinnerian behaviorist are supposedly studying the same creature,
Mm.
they both get different findings.
Mm.
And the different findings are real findings, like the
They're
empirical
both
feedback.
valid. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the differences come from the approach.
Yeah.
So he's talking about a way where instead of like going, oh, what's the right way, like, and if we don't insist on having some one monolithic system that, you know, says what
Mm.
objective reality is, then we lose all sense of order or objectivity. So beyond, you know, the sort of this idea of there's one picture, and if we didn't have this kind of logical order, then we just have chaos. Or then there's on the other side the postmodern thing where everything is just completely relativized. You know, he mentioned that at the beginning of the paper, where, you know, relativism sort of, or the postmodern approach sort of comes to a dead end. But he's talking about how we can take the essential insights of both sides and transcend them in a new approach, which doesn't deny the objectivity of both, say, the ethologist and the Skinnerian. That, you know, the empirical reality gives precise feedback. Like the feedback is more precise than our theories and procedures can say.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I like the fact that he separated that. So there's he said there's concepts and the theory, there's the findings and the process, right? Then there's a process and the findings.
Yeah.
And then the theory and the concepts can change, but the findings can be consistent in the sense that, let's say, the way I understand it, if you use the paradigm of the Newtonian physics, and if you do really precise experiments, it will result in consistent results, consistent with that model. And then
consistent with the model.
Yeah, consistent with how you measured it and how you run the experiments. There's precision in that, right?
Yeah.
And then you have quantum, which has its own sets of experiments. It's also precise, even though they don't agree with each other, right?
They don't agree with each other.
At the moment, no one's found. I think that's the holy grail in physics.
Yeah, like looking for
they haven't found it.
Theory of everything kind of thing.
Yeah. So then that's consistent. But I also like the fact that, remember when we were studying meditation, there's this story about the, 5 blind humans in the elephant.
Yeah.
What does the elephant look like? It's like the ear. They said people refer to this as that, but I said no, it's not the same, because in that story we already know what the elephant looks like. Whereas in what he's saying, no one has the one picture, right?
No one has it.
Yeah. Because you can have consistency within. I think in the other paper, he talked of machines. You know, it's like a machine. That's how airplanes fly, right? It's consistent, but that doesn't mean that the way airplanes fly is the way we behave in the world with all the implicit knowledge, right? So it's quite interesting. Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was saying something like there, you know, in the sort of philosophy of science, there can be two sides. There's like scientific realism, which is like, you know, there's one objective reality that is independent of any kind of observer or whatever. And then there's the other one which says that, sorry, my light is flickering.
Yeah, I thought you were watching television. It's like, oh, it's multitasking.
Wait a second, I'll turn this little light off.
Yeah. It's either that or your aura is like...
Yeah, my aura. Or, you know, there's like the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's the idea that science is pure construction.
It's a social construct, and it changes.
It's just a construct.
Yeah.
But then he says, well, let us not believe that it can just be a construct, because we arrive at our conferences to talk about science as a construct in an airplane, and if the science was wrong about, you know, the way the air flows over the wings, to take into account, you know, aerodynamics and the weight of the plane and the fuel and all of this, then we would not be arriving at our conferences. Right. So let's not sort of denigrate that, but we can also see that different approaches will give us different findings, and that we can incorporate that the world that is under observation includes our procedures and actions and practices.
Yeah, and so maybe just to backtrack a bit, because I did a subject on epistemological models. It was
Yeah,
for my, where was this? It was for my one of my innovation and creative intelligence innovation degree. Because I'm doing a double degree, and they did talk
right.
about there's the objectivist, then the subjective, and then there's a constructivism. So it's
Yeah,
like reality. There's an objective reality independent of the subject. Oh, it's all subjective, and
yeah,
it's like we construct it, and different histories construct different things. But I think Genlin is way it's above this. Or
it's above there, definitely. Yeah,
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 yeah.
and what I like
I'm
about
also, yeah, go on, go on.
what I liked about that's why when I wrote the title of the poem is crossing, right? And then
Yeah,
Genlin talked about crossing, and it really makes sense to me. The intuition I had is so when you exist, you implicitly like I know where I am, I know my history, and then something new happens. It doesn't mean that then those everything else connected to me changes, but it doesn't mean that they had to be recreated again. They're already there, but then that's why I like the way he used the dot dot dot. It's like it changes the
yes, yeah, yeah,
thing
yeah.
without having them exist in space and time in the
Right.
positioning. Yeah, yeah. So everything is
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
I guess everything is one. It's like a connected mass, and if you pinpoint one, then it explicates some of it, changes it without having to recreate it. Is that where
Yeah, something
am
like
I
that. He uses terms like carrying forward and
carrying forward?
implying. So in your, say, the poetry example,
Yeah,
you write a line and then you don't know quite how to finish it. You
yeah,
know, somehow you have a sense of what the line needs to say or what you want it to say, but you
yeah,
haven't quite found the right word or phrase to do it. So your pen is poised above the paper or your fingers are poised above the keyboard, ready to write it. You try out a few different lines and they're like,
yeah,
no, that's not it.
mm,
That's not quite what it is. So in a sense, what he's pointing out is that your implicit knowing is more precise than what you can explicitly say at any one moment. And that implicit knowing occurs with every moment. So it doesn't actually have a time or space position of its own. So every
yeah,
occurring is also an implying, and certain things come out of that implying as the next occurring,
yeah,
which carries forward the implying. The implying isn't left behind in the previous time slot, sort of thing.
yeah,
But of
and
course,
yeah,
when you think about it this way, suddenly you see that time is not some objective thing out there that is
yeah,
already sliced up into units, because we have this constant occurring with an implying that's also constant. And time, like the next occurring is really up to how we divide it up, according to whatever unit scheme we're going by.
yeah, and and what I like about how he moves on from that is so there's that the implying occurring implying, but
Yeah.
then he said there's also the logical, which you should keep separate, and
Yes.
and and the way what I like what he said about that is they they you keep them separate, but they affect each other. And then I
Yes.
remember the example he had with water, right? Water
Yeah.
was water before we discovered that it's made of one atom of hydrogen and two atoms of oxygen.
Yeah.
And then some wise guy or some someone from social media, oh, does that mean there was no water before we did H2O? Of course not. But he also said that, but knowing that water is H2O changes our relationship with water because now we can create water from H2O. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we know the logical structure, we can, is it manipulate? We could elicit a response, a responsive order from the implicit understanding because we have
Yeah.
this logical thing
Yeah.
that's
We found
consistent.
it.
Yeah.
We found an explicit logic that's been lifted out of what was implied by the empirical feedback. And then now that we have this logical explicit structure, it then becomes part of the next implying that comes with the occurring, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
It's
then
beautiful.
because we have this implying structure, well, this logical structure, it will also have its own implications. So then
Yeah,
you can develop from that, right? Suddenly there's a logical structure that has all these inferences that develop further. Um,
yeah,
so it's like, and the mistake that he's pointing out that is often made in practice, in scientific practice, is to put this logical order first. So
yeah,
instead of like seeing that this occurring, implying implicate order, this responsive order, is purely empirical, and that this interaction level comes first, we tend to assume that our logical structures underlie it because of their predictive power,
yeah,
right? So what happens is we begin to start, like with this H2O example, it's like we begin to construe the universe as if it was something that we made,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's sort of
and
like,
yeah,
yeah.
and I don't know. Are you familiar with Nassim Taleb?
Yes, yes, I have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he talked about
Anti-fragile, right?
yeah, anti-fragile, and
Yeah,
he talked about how actually we have this romantic idea or misconception that science comes first and then technology. So someone discovers the science, and then we take the science and make something out of that science. But actually, he said when you look back at history, people were doing it first, and then someone discovered the principles of the thing that's already been done,
yeah,
and then they flip the history and say and claim that it was because of my discovery that, but it's already been done. It's not like if he didn't discover the principle, no one was doing it. And Nassim called this lecturing birds how to fly. It's a bit like,
yeah,
oh, I'm the scientist, I know how aerodynamic works. So bird, this is how you
yeah,
fly. No, the bird was flying before you even did your measurements or did your equations, right? So and he also gave
right.
examples like the Romans didn't leave any writing. That's why we cannot replicate because they were very empirical. The Romans were practical, whereas the Greeks were more thinking, thinking, thinking. But the Romans were
Yeah,
building, building, building. So they built all
right.
these viaducts, which we don't know how to replicate because they didn't leave blueprints really. They didn't explain the theory. They were just good at making things,
Yeah,
and they said we don't need to explain it, right? And it's interesting, and I think that's where Jen Lin says that what comes first is the interaction of bodies in an environment, right?
yeah, yeah,
So it,
exactly.
it so
Yeah, in fact, it's a bit more like, objects are generated out of this primary interaction process of interaction.
yeah,
And
and
in this way, we can conserve the logical order that we're used to working with, but not have change as this weird thing that we have to try and incorporate into some a priori fixed structure that somehow we believe was there first, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and the beauty of this is I think this is important because my first degree was in economics, and I think what happened with economics is we've been trying to fit people into this mold of the rational utility maximizing thing. We
Yeah.
assume that humans are maximizing choices all the time. And then I remember when we maybe they've changed the way they teach this, but I doubt it. But they also said, so this is the thing, supply and demand, and then set ceteris paribus, hold all other things constant. It's a bit like remove the implicit and just look at this. But of
You
course,
look
in
at
the
the
real
explicit
world,
and exactly, and then and try to do things as if the what is explicitly modeled or what we
yeah,
have is all that there is, and that
that's
we try
right.
and it's like where we pin that down is okay, we know this is fixed, and whatever we need to find out we need to add to this pre-existing picture. And
Yeah.
actually, in a lot of ways, this is the default way people think, like the very underlying like the underlying procedure of thought goes along those lines, and it's a really difficult habit to break because it's in a
Mm.
way you sort of have to let go of this sort of I guess sense of underlying certainty in a
Yeah.
way. I think there's sort of like there's another philosopher, what's his name? He's French guy, Michel Bippo. He used to be, I think he used to be a quantum physicist, but he started
Mm-hmm.
moving more and more towards philosophy, and now he's like a philosopher of science with a really strong background in physics, quantum physics, and he named it like this kind of like golem thinking. That's
Mm.
that or something like this. But because it sort of assumes that there's an end point to the process of thinking. That once
Mm-hmm.
we've put all the pieces of the jigsaw together, then that's it. We've got our picture, and we don't have to do any more work.
Yeah.
You know, it's and it's sort of like a fundamentally closed and wrong way of approaching reality.
Yeah. So I like the dot
Yeah.
dot dot, and I remember Slavoj Žižek talk about the LGBTQIA plus, and he talked about the plus. I think the plus is like the occurring imply, because when you
Right.
add the plus, whatever came before it is changed, right?
Yeah.
That's like I had this. This might be this will be a bit of a jump, but I think it's fun because the way I look when I read the thing about the dot dot dot, the imply occur imply, and they carry over, right? They carry over. I thought of the
Yeah.
blockchain. So I thought
Right. Right.
reality is a dynamic blockchain. So basic stuff.
Yeah.
Blockchain is like you have these cryptographically signed transactions, and you just
Yeah.
and then you do it, and then to add to it, you have proof of work or proof of stake, and then it's signed again, and you just add to it again. You keep adding, and the longest chain is the valid is the one that's used in the network, right?
Yeah.
So so this is a bit like that, but the difference is with the blockchain, you could zip back, and when you add things at the top, it doesn't really change the previous
Yeah.
transactions, or
Yeah.
does
The
it?
previous.
Maybe it does. It
No.
doesn't
No.
change
Well,
each one,
no. Because
but it
yeah.
changes
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
context, right? So maybe
Yeah.
it's true because what Jed is also saying, that these logical constructs with the concepts, when you come up with the new extension, they still remain the same. So the old theories still work within that. But in the same way,
Yeah.
in the blockchain, when you add a new block to the chain, it doesn't really change the previous chains, but it changes the whole chain because it's no longer, and it changes the way you can look at it. You know what I mean? Because
Right. Right.
the meanings change without changing the individual constructs, right? It's like an
Right.
interesting.
Yeah. 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 Look, I get it. I don't know what else I can say or add to that analogy though with the blockchain, but it is an interesting one. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
actually to sort of go with the tangent,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the movement towards a more decentralized form of organization
yeah,
is definitely in line with this way of thinking.
yeah,
We're not assuming some pre-existing hierarchical structure that everything must conform to.
yeah,
So, you can add to the number of nodes, you can reduce the number of nodes, as long as there's some nodes that are working together to verify the transactions, then you've still got your blockchain, you've still got your, you know,
yeah.
verified transactions.
Yeah, and I like the fact that also that Jenlin refers to affordances because we learned this in product design that like when you open
Oh,
a
that's cool.
door, yeah, like
Yeah, that's cool. It's very cool.
like when you open a door, you don't think about it because the way you design it affords this movement.
Yeah.
So you know that a product design is bad when you need to put instructions. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Because
So
ideally, implicitly, you should know what to do if the design is good, you know?
yes, 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 totally, totally. Maybe you should explain a little bit about what is meant by affordance. I'll explain like how I understand it when I came across it in philosophy, and I'm sure it crosses over. I mean, it's the same concept, but just like how it's different in different approaches in product design, it might have a slightly different conceptualization. So let's see.
So, so there's a few angles here. So one of the angles with affordances is so we have our senses, right? So in a way,
Yeah,
there's an infinite number of things in the world, really.
yeah,
But then we limit it based on our senses. And and in a way we have a model inside our head apparently like when we only the the high resolution thing we see is only this, you know what I mean, when you that's why when you
yep,
do that experiment it fucks it up because the high resolution is just there and your mind is actually recomputing the
yep,
rest. That's why the visual cortex is huge because our eyes are just limited. So that's why your high resolution is just in this focus and the rest is like peripheral awareness. So if something moves you actually see it because
right.
so affordances is like it's something that fits the senses like
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
so like this is actually a reincarnation of the Sumerian tablets because this shape and the size it offers an affordance for the hand.
Yep.
So let's say even like this. So even without explaining, grab it like that. It's so even a baby, give this a baby, the baby will do that. You don't need to tell the
Yeah,
baby
yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool,
because
cool, cool.
it affords itself. And in the same way that so that's a positive side, but also there's a negative side wherein I don't know if you noticed this like benches in public parks. They put those armrests in between.
Yeah.
Do you know why they do that?
Why do they do that?
So that the homeless couldn't
Oh, so
sleep.
the homeless don't lie down on
So
the
they're
right.
removing the affordance because without that, that the shape of the bench
Yeah.
affords someone to lie there. So some designer designed a way to remove the affordance. You know what I mean? So it can work both
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ways.
That just
Yeah,
reminds me
yeah,
of something funny with park benches, or like when you sit in a like a some waiting area, like at a bus stop or
yeah, yeah,
in a train station or whatever. Some of them are designed, and they use a sort of stainless steel or whatever. And when you're wearing certain kinds of clothes, you just kind of slide off, and you can't get comfortable. You can't sit without sort of just you can't even put any weight on the backrest without starting to slide off. And I think that must be deliberate so you don't stay there
so
too
that it's just
long.
a short term. You just park your butt short term, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
this happening in. Well, we could do. we could go on another tangent, but maybe you say your
Yeah,
thing. That where I want to go
about
with this,
affordances.
maybe it's about
Yeah,
how we're being conditioned by, let's say, Facebook or YouTube. We're being
yeah,
conditioned certain behaviors. Because people design for this thing. You know, it's not like
yeah, yeah,
accidental
yeah,
that people
absolutely.
keep swiping. There's a psychology behind that and
Yeah,
design. Yeah.
I
Now,
wrote
now
some
you have
papers that,
affordance from the philosophy side.
yeah, yeah, I wrote some papers that it sort of worked with this idea of affordance, and it was, again, it was drawing from Gendlin.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so how to begin? Okay, so in a way, this is a very phenomenological approach to
Yeah.
affordance. So let's say that, uh, gosh, how to begin? Okay, okay. So when we see a table, and when an ant sees a table,
Mm.
you know, we are both experiencing the same object, but for
Yeah.
us, it implies everything about why we make tables and what we use them for. But for the ant, the table is like um, this big adventure to find the
Mm.
crumb, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So what the table is in its sort of sensory umwelt,
Umlaut. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
its, in its sensory scope, what its body it affords in terms of the contours of the reality it has access to. We're both observing the same table, but the table it affords means something completely different to, you know, what our affordances make available to us in terms of when a table is presented before us.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why
So
the question is, why do you sit on a tree stump? Right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, like, you think of the most rudimentary organism that has sort of this sensory boundary, and the sensory boundary affords it a particular world where it will be able to detect the things that help it sustain its life and avoid the things that that
Yeah.
endanger its life. Yeah, and these, you know, like, it'll come in a sensorium. The sensorium is like the mixture of its particular sensory picture. So the
Yeah.
sensory picture of a bat, which actually was part of a very famous philosophy paper, because "What Is It Like to Be a Bat"
Ah,
by
yeah.
Nagel.
The Chalmers, David
Uh,
Chalmers. Yeah.
Nagel. Oh,
Nagel.
Chalmers
Nagel.
did
Yeah.
talk about it though. He
Yeah. Yeah.
Chalmers, you know, there. Um, you know, the sensory picture it affords is quite different to ours,
Uh huh.
but we can both observe the same world and
Mm.
detect similar kind of contours. But
Mm.
the because of our cognition, the meaning of it will be different. So
Mm.
for us, our perception kind of affords a particular world, like the world that appears to us in our world picture is very precisely shaped to what our sensorium affords.
Yeah.
And it's different for different sentient creatures, even though we all are existing in the same world. Does that make
Mm.
sense? So then we come back
Yeah.
to the ant and the human both observing the same table. But for the human, it's like, oh, it's a table. For the ant, it's like, it's a whole day to go and grab that crumb and bring it back to its home, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the environment, because I was showing you this book earlier before we started, the Sciences of the Artificial by David
Yeah.
Simon, and it was one of the earlier books on artificial intelligence, and it talked about the ant. So the ant has a simple algorithm, like so they go out randomly and then they leave pheromones, and then when they find food they go back, and the faster they go back the more pheromones get left, and then the more ants go there until the food is gone. It's like a
Yeah.
simple algorithm, right?
Yeah.
And if the ant lives in a flat space, as in like just a flat space, the behavior looks uninteresting, right? Because it's just like
Yeah.
straight lines. But if you put the ant in a rugged, undulating terrain, it's the same algorithm, but if you look at it from above, it's much more interesting. So
Yeah.
I guess he was saying that intelligence is not, yeah, it actually works at it from the other side. Intelligence is not it's not a function of the neural power. It's actually a function of how complex your environment is, right?
Right.
That's why there's another book called Scale, and he says that the bigger cities have more patents per capita, have more because of the complexity in the environment. It doesn't mean that the people there are necessarily smarter than the people in the more rural areas. It's just that the environment that is created when you put so many autonomous agents in one place creates all this complexity. And when you're immersed in that complexity, because if reality is primarily an interaction, not a concept, because if you think about it, if you think that reality is like a certain way things are arranged, it doesn't matter where you are, right? You can just be moved.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's an interaction, you need something to interact with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Otherwise, you can have all the brain power, but if no one's interacting with you, nothing really happens, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's where I have a problem with the brain in the vat kind of thing. Like I'll just put my brain in silica. It still has to interact with something. Otherwise, it's not. It can't just be there, right?
Well, yeah, yeah, because like you know, back to language and concepts, like we don't even have the ability to form expression without spatial metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
We are in an environment that gives us. It's like, you know, our body. Again, drawing from Gentleman,
Mm.
is our body's direct interaction with the world is prior to perception. Like, so one of
Mm-hmm.
the errors of modern research in consciousness and body mind stuff, you know, philosophy of mind, is to make perception like the central foundation of understanding all of this stuff. But actually, prior to perceiving, our body is here. You know, it's like
Mm.
if you observe a plant, the way the plant sits in the world does not, in order to interact with the world, it does not first build a conceptual picture through
Yeah.
which, you know, it perceives, right? There's no intermediary step between the world and the plants. And actually, it's the same with our body. Our body implicitly knows its orientation in space.
Yeah.
It knows, you know, up and down, side to side. It's already implicitly interacting with the world, and that forms part of our implicit picture of being here. Um, of um, and that's where we get our concepts from. You know, like when language first started evolving. I mean, this is very much a theory, but I'm pretty sure this is going in the right direction. A lot of research sort of, you know, backs this up.
Mm.
That uh, the, you know, language was first very closely associated
Mm.
with manipulation of objects in the world, and with making sounds. So putting them together, like you know, pointing, gesture.
Yep.
When we and it's very closely related to technology and making things. So, you know, the earliest sort of, you know, we're making like stone tools, and you're doing it, and someone else is observing, and in a way, like, you know, that they're observing, and you want to pass on
Mm.
how to make this tool. So suddenly we have like manipulation of objects in the world. So you're using your motor skills
Mm.
and you're demonstrating with your hands, strike the rock like this to
Mm.
make the shard come off, or whatever it is, and there are certain episodic steps you have to do. So you have to make the tool in the right kind of order.
That's
If you
the
don't do
process part, right? The process in
yeah,
the
if you
genlin,
don't
yeah.
exactly, if you don't follow the right order, then you don't get the right tool at the end. So there, suddenly, we have the development of a syntax which comes from actions. So there's
Mm.
an action syntax, and language, in a way, it's like it, it lifts this pattern out from the immediate environment of our world, the immediate actions
Mm.
of making the tool. It lifts this pattern out so that we can use that pattern independently of the things in the world and speak about it
Mm.
just in terms of that pattern. And then we take that pattern and we reapply it to the world. We can reapply that pattern to other things that pattern didn't originally come from.
Mm.
This is how language, logic, concept emerged from our bodily interaction, like very, very visceral, very felt sense of being here, working with objects in the world, and using gesture, sound, and steps
Mm.
to be able to make it something communicable. And then that became like cultural capital that's
Mm.
passed on from generation to generation. And as it gets passed on, things are added. Just like you were saying before, like sitting on the stump, like there must have been a time before anyone had chairs, right? There was
Mm.
once the first chair. We don't know when that was, but once upon a
Was
time there were no chairs.
probably in
And
Atlantis.
someone sitting on perhaps someone sitting on a wooden stump and going, oh, it's kind of comfortable because it conforms to my body and it has this particular shape. What if I could replicate that by making it, right?
Mm.
So then, someone makes a chair, right?
Yeah.
Or
Mm.
something like it. Other people will see it, and because they already have an implicit understanding of what it is to sit on a stump,
Yeah.
they
Because
will
it's
go,
afforded by
aha,
the body. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, afforded by the body, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, the affordances, they'll go, aha, a chair, right? And then they'll go and sit in it and go, okay, this is good, but how could we make it better? And
Yeah.
there comes the endless, because of human desires, the endless process of the search for the perfect chair, right? And
Yeah.
then out of that generates every possible iteration of chair that you could ever have, like from lounges to chairs to thrones
Yeah.
that emperors sit on, and like the chairs start to take on more meaning than just a nice place to sit. And some are more comfortable than others, have different purposes, whatever. But in the original aha was this direct bodily interaction with the world.
There's a
And
book in there, Ashok, from
yeah,
Stop to Game of Thrones.
yeah, exactly.
I, while you were talking, I had like I think two questions came to mind.
Yeah.
So how does this then relate to the Platonic forms, or even the Hindu thing that like there's a lotus here on earth because in the noetic realms there's a perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
So is that no? That's not
Well,
the. Could that be the implicit source? I don't know. It's not the
yeah,
object.
yeah.
That's a good question, right? Yeah.
I have my own take on that, actually,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
because it will be very different from the received view that you'll get about Plato from the standard sort of current
Yeah.
academic view. Because these days Plato is very closely related, or was sort of cast as the original rationalist,
Mm.
and okay, in a way that's true, But then that gets conflated with this idea of an absolute distinction between subject and object, and that, Plato believed that, the rational concept was more real than the observed world, because the observed world can only be seen through the senses, and the senses are imperfect, so we can't trust them.
Because we live in a cave and we just see shadows, right?
Yeah,
We need to
yeah.
get out of the cave.
Yeah, and it's all about rationality, right? As meditators, we understand the cave metaphor very differently.
Yeah.
So, of course, what we receive from the senses is not, if we naively accept the sensory picture at face value, then we're missing a lot of things that are really going on in the world.
Yeah.
So
We
in
don't
that way,
see bacteria without an aid, right? We don't see, we don't see
yeah,
the
exactly.
earth while being here. We need
Yeah.
a picture or something.
Right. So, of course, Plato is correct about we can't trust the senses at face value kind of thing. And that but he talks about how the sage needs to withdraw from the senses in order to grasp reality. And this also agrees with the Indian picture as well. The sage needs to be indifferent to the touches of sense,
Yeah.
But in terms of like the Platonic forms or the ideal forms and stuff, I see it like this. I see it like, and this kind of relates to the Platonic, the Socratic method, the dialectic form of philosophy that Plato follows, where you like
There's an interlocutor and you keep asking questions.
Yeah. And it's all about like, sort of discovering how your original premises have their limits, and then you're left not really knowing anymore. So you're always sort of taken to that edge, and then there's uncertainty.
Oh,
right?
the that.
Yeah, the dot. Exactly.
Yeah.
You're taken to the edge, and then there's uncertainty. So Plato's very like that. But when it comes to the ideal forms, it's a bit like, we'll go back to the chair example. We've created a chair. We sort of got it from sitting down and understanding, I could make this sitting down activity more comfortable if I made it like this, right? So you make a chair in order for it to be more comfortable than your sitting spot previously, and other people try it out and go, oh yeah, great, that's really more comfortable than where we've all been sitting before.
Yeah. You can also sit on a zafu, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we have this, now we have a sitting tool.
Yeah.
The chair is our tool for sitting, right? it brings us comfort and whatever else. But then it's like, we have this original idea from being in the world, our activity, our behavior, being in we're in the world, we're not standing apart, separate, conceptualizing something and going, oh, here's the ideal form, let's make it. We be in the world and we come up with this idea, chair. And from then on, chair exists, right? If we
as a concept or
as a concept,
as an abstraction, or
it's an abstraction, because now we have a plan. It's in our shared. Other people observe the chair and immediately know what it means, because they go, oh, I can sit in that and I know it will be more comfortable than my previous sitting spot. So now we have chair, and the community understands chair, and they become a community of chair makers, right? So we have a community of chair makers because they've discovered how to, from the act of sitting, how to make this object or this tool that makes sitting more comfortable, or whatever, right? Then the ideal form is the fact that chairs can always be better in some way, shape, or other, right? And can always fulfill other functions And this iteration of always more is endless. Always more. It's like infinite. The chair plan is infinitely generative of all chairs for time immemorial, ever since the original chair, right? So,
Aha!
yeah. And so the ideal form is known by its absence. It can never be actual here in terms of the world. It's constantly being trying to be realized in its chairs, but it's the absence of the ideal form that generates, like, a, if you think about it like 0 and 1, the 0 of the chair plan is infinitely generative of chairs. It's like it's almost like um, the way cognition, either very, very primary, or even higher level, becomes this generative principle. You know, from these,
Yeah.
from the absence of the ideal form, worlds are generated, not just chairs. The entire human-built worlds are generated because the ideal form of anything is known by its absence. It, when we want ideal justice, let's say, or beauty, right? We might witness it. We might witness beauty in an object, or like we might witness justice when we see it being done, and implicitly, not in any articulated way, but implicitly, in order to identify anything as beautiful or justice, we're sort of measuring it against some absolute idea or sense of justice or of beauty, unarticulated, like underlying. If we didn't have this, there's no way we could actually recognize it, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
original
yeah.
idea. Yeah. So, but we're always trying to find it in the world. It's like, this emptiness, trying to fill it outside, because the world of sensory forms can never realize the perfect chair. It can never realize perfect beauty. It can never realize ideal justice.
So
So
mm,
it's the absence that generates it. So the ideal forms are known by their absence, if that makes sense.
yeah. I mean, I have three thoughts on that. One is
Yeah,
the ideal form can be like chair dot dot dot,
yeah,
right? The ideal form of a chair is chair dot dot dot. That's
yeah,
one. Or it could be like, I don't know if it was Aquinas or Anselm, where when you name God, how do
yeah.
you define God? Is that whatever you think of, there's always something that exceeds it. You know what I mean? You
Right.
via negativa, you define it negatively. So
Yes, yes, yes. It's very, very related to the apophatic approach, the via
yeah,
negativa. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like and also the not this, not this. Is that Buddhist? Where
yeah.
it's not
Neti,
this, it's
neti.
not this, it's not this. You know.
Yeah,
And another reference I have is Helen of Troy,
yeah,
the most beautiful woman that ever lived, that caused the Trojan War. You don't see a painting of her.
yeah.
You don't know how she, because I think once you paint it, then she's no longer the most beautiful. You know, and once you, oh, it's a bit like, do you do a bit of programming?
Yeah.
So
No, no. Programming. I did a little bit long time ago, just mucking around.
yeah,
Not
it's just a
really.
simple thing in
Yeah,
object oriented programming. So you have
yeah,
the class, and then you have a generator thing that you have to
yeah.
instantiate its object.
Right.
But if you don't instantiate it, maybe that's the ideal form is the uninstantiated. It's like the transcendent, right? It's like from this thing you could get all these objects, but that thing itself, it's not instantiated. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? The
Yeah.
variables don't have value, but you can put value.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah,
It kind of links.
I
Yeah.
just I was just looking up one of my old papers where was just talking about like remembering I wrote a paper on this in on Plato with the forms, and I'm just looking at
Yeah.
it now, just trying to find what I was trying to paraphrase because I think I
Yeah.
said it better in the paper. Okay, so here's this bit like. Clearly, such ideas as absolute beauty or uprightness are not part of our sensory experience. Yet, as Socrates suggests, we all have an idea of it, or we can recognize it somehow when we see beautiful things or we witness an act of justice served. Others may see things differently, but will measure their judgments against some idea of absolute beauty or justice. So dialectic in this conventional sense, when applied with careful precision, can shape one's rational understanding, sharpen it, if you will, so that one's idea becomes more aligned with others and together more aligned with a universal idea of beauty or justice. But the ideal form remains elusive. It makes itself known by its absence. It only appears to our intuition when we sense it contradicted in reasoning and action, or partially captured in what we witness. In this way, when Socrates asks if the body gives a true perception of them, naturally we would be compelled to answer in the negative.
So yeah,
And then
yeah,
later,
yeah.
later in the paper, I say something like this. Okay, it could be said that the rational domain circumscribes what is known, but it is not an entirely static entity. For we are the living thinkers who constitute its boundaries. The unknown stands outside. We don't know everything about the universe. But it also stands within. We don't know our inner relation to it. These, by definition, cannot be two distinct unknowns. We feel the absence of ideal form because we struggle constantly with our limits. It is alive in our intuition, but partial in bodily experience and its attractions. The
Mm.
psychology of this is evident in humanity, mutually reinforced individually and collectively, and displayed instinctively in nature.
Mm.
Yeah. Got you
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. No, I was remembering as well in the Janlin paper. I talked to, maybe you studied this as well. Is it the mystery of the Georgias? Like if you don't know something, then you can't even know where to begin because you don't know what question to ask, right? But at the
Right.
same time, you can't know. It's a bit like that. You must know
Yeah.
something about, like, to even ask the first question. You must know something, right? Because otherwise, it's an unknown unknown, right? You don't.
Yeah. It begins with the implicit. We stand at the
Right.
edge of of what we know or what we think we know.
Yeah.
What comes next is implied. Somehow we have to catch it.
Yeah, and he said that normally, like what we're doing, like we're right now when we're doing actually this, we're catching the
Yeah.
next. And then he said when you're stuck and when there's nothing coming, then you specify, right? So
Yeah.
you explicate a certain point, and then when that coalesces in that point, then more. Yeah, this is not the reason why. Like I've been studying for a long time, and the more I study, the more I think I don't know. It's because the dot keeps getting bigger, right? Because
Yeah.
the more edges you have, the more dots happen, right? So you think
Yeah.
that's that's why I think, is it Socrates said, I don't know that I know that I don't know when he went
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
oracle. Yeah.
Yeah. He's known for saying that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Actually,
Yeah. So that's how I see ideal form. It's like it's known by its absence. And like there's this unknown is always with us. It's like it's part of the all that of the implicit with us with every occurring, right?
yeah.
It's always there, right? We live with the unknown in every moment. It's not something that the explicit cancels out and gets rid of. It's always there. It's always part of the implicit. It's also like you could say, like the concept of yin or prima materia or prakriti in the
Yes.
Sanskrit. It's this sort of original, um, undifferentiated, unformed chaos out of which new forms
Come on.
emerge.
And
Yeah,
physics are coming to that with the dark energy and dark matter. And
right.
how's this with the zero? I just remembered when you mentioned the zero.
Yeah,
So I heard this physicist, cosmologist discussing this. Because one theory of the universe is, so like one law of physics is you can't create something out of nothing, right? So nothing can come out of nothing. But then how is the universe expanding? And then the way he explained it is, let's say zero, right? Zero can be the sum of any negative and positive number.
right.
So negative one plus positive one is zero, right?
Yeah,
So it's negative 1 billion trillion trillion and positive 1 billion trillion trillion also equals zero. So in a way, if the
yes, yes.
dark matter, dark energy equals the known universe, it's still zero, even if it seems to be bigger. It's a paradox. It's like crazy, right?
I
Yeah.
you thought of like I have to go back to Leibniz. There's a philosopher, in Leibniz. He's well
The
known for
calculus
being
guy. The calculus guy.
the other calculus guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're reminding me of something about Leibniz's work and his ontology of the monad. So this
Ah, yeah, yeah.
zero is kind of very similar, I think, to his concept of monad. But that's
Yeah, there's another Greek,
um,
is it
yeah,
Parmenides or something, that nothing changes. Everything's just, yeah,
yeah,
there's all right. Maybe,
yeah.
actually, I have another poem that relates to this. Maybe I'll read the
Okay.
poem and then we could go to more mundane stuff in terms of, do you want to talk about technology and psychosocial things, or do you want to go to
Oh,
spirituality?
sure. Oh, maybe
Which
they'll both come
one?
up.
Oh,
Well, let's
all
let's
right.
go in the technology psychosocial direction.
Yep.
I think
And then
kind
things
of
will come.
relates anyway.
So just to round this, it's another poem. I think I wrote this while I was doing heavy in our meditation school, but it relates to what we just discussed, some weirdly enough.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna explicate the implicit.
yeah.
Wow, where is it? I really need to. All right. Connection. The most fragile spot in my heart knows well your warmth, breath of the early morning sun, softly kissing sleep of my eyes, yet you, my hands, cannot touch. The deepest water of my stillness hears your sweet whisper, tickling symphony of strength, yet your voice falls deaf to my ears. The floating feather of my seingness knows the colors of your rainbow, undulating with the landscape of my desire, yet my eyes are blind to your face. The fiercest chunk of my belly smells your ferocious fragrance, soothing fire, sweet as death, yet my nose impervious to your knowing. The finest silk in my groin tastes the ecstasy of your freedom, wild horses galloping to the sea, yet my tongue burnt numb to your essence. Nothing conceived can ever exceed you. You exceed everything that can ever be conceived. I fear, yet I am most fascinated by you. I can do nothing but slowly meander through the mists of your mysteries, gently drenched by your presence. I can't help but love.
Well, now it feels a very spiritual atmosphere.
No, there was a few philosophical
Yeah,
references there. No, it's good to, and yeah, whatever. So
yeah.
you begin with you seem I felt I implicitly felt that you had something to say about technology and social dynamics.
Let's see. Technology. Well, we were discussing last week about the way, when we build our environment, we build our environment with all sorts of these sort of technological um, tools, our
Yep,
tools. Marshall McLuhan, we build our tools, we
and
shape our tools,
tools
and
shape
then
us.
our tools shape us. So there's this process of interaction that we're going on,
Yep.
and uh, yeah, there's this kind of like part of this process, the direction it's heading, and something that Marshall McLuhan really kind of foresaw, because his heyday was in the 60s, right? Was that it would reach a point of saturation or terminus where the medium in the medium is developed to the point where our whole lives are remediated in our objects and then
Mm,
sustained in those objects in a global network. And that's when he coined like the term global village.
mm,
And we're seeing that happen right now. We have a world filled with smart devices, and the Internet of Things is just around the corner. So we have these smart network devices that are always on and with instantaneous communication across the globe. So that instantaneous aspect collapses time and space. We're talking right now, and it's instantaneous communication. Although I'm in Shanghai and
mm,
you're in Sydney, and the time is different. We're on opposite sides of the world, kind of thing, and yet here we are, like having this instantaneous communication over our
mm,
network devices. I've just got my laptop here. I don't know if you're
mm.
working for a laptop or you've got your desktop there, but whatever.
It's a laptop, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
laptop. So, and in a way, like the contents of our inner life, our subjective life, is getting remediated in our devices, and our
Mm,
like our social media profiles and whatever, all that stuff become like sort of proxy identities that we use to
mm,
face interact with the world. And this is a really fascinating and kind of um, potentially um, I was going to say dangerous. I'm not quite sure what the right word is. I need Jenlin to sit
so
with this word,
so
and
what's dangerous, you
dangerous is not
reckon?
quite the right word. But sorry.
What's dangerous, you reckon? Which part?
Um, there's a there's a sense that because our lives are kind of getting emptied out into these sort of almost like prosthetic extensions of our inner world, but sort of captured in these objects,
Mm,
uh, that we're no longer situated inside ourselves like we once were. We're always sort of situated in our objects much more, and we've become quite disconnected in the
mm,
process. And in fact, you could almost see like the culmination point of that would be the irony is also that it's a materialistic worldview that kind of pushes in this direction. So, the materialist doesn't see any problem with or any particular difference with living in, let's say, a fully realized virtual reality. And there are a lot of people out there that think this is great, we should do it. Let's go and fully realized virtual reality and interact there. But in a way, what we're doing is uh, jumping inside the Cartesian box. We've split
mm,
off completely from this felt sense, this this sort of affective bodily orientation to the world in which our body has evolved with and through.
Mm.
Yeah. So there's this sort of yeah, it's an issue to tackle in the 21st century, I think.
Yeah, I think we need. I used to think that, but now I think I'm. What do you call it? I've made it more complex the way I think about this because going back to McLuhan, in a way, the print medium was the one that abstracted us out of being us.
Yeah.
Because in the print medium, there are gatekeepers, the publishers, and then once it's printed, it's hard to change. And it's whereas what we're doing now, in a way, we're going back to the oral tradition, right? Like we're in a way we're like in a campfire, the two of us. It's not like we're
Yeah.
editing
Yeah.
and putting it in a static medium or in a.
Yeah.
That's why in the time of the book, there's the book, the authoritative thing, right? The That's where monotheism really prospered. Is when there's a book, this is it. You
Right.
must believe and conform. And whereas with things like social media, I think that's why there's this interesting friction because some people are complaining. But I think it always happens when new technologies come. They come. Partly when novels came out, there were complaints that, oh no, the women, they're not gonna leave their homes. They're just gonna read Jane Austen and not meet real men. They'll be just embroiled in this story. You know what I mean? There's always a
Yeah.
moral panic when you but there's also the question: is this time different? That's I think that's the dialectic going back to our thing. It's like there's this
Yeah.
like in law we do like there's this phenomena called the law of the horse, like when horses came along to be made transport and they were defecating all over the city. Do you need to make a law for the horse, or are the existing laws enough to cover what the horse is doing? Same way with the internet. Do we really need specific laws about the internet? Like, let's say cyberbullying. Do we need specific laws for cyberbullying? Or is it just part of bullying? You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
seem to
Yeah.
think that when a new medium comes, it should come with its own new set. But we're still, yeah, there's also this thing that Nassim Taleb called neomania. We're like enamored with the new, but if you really look at it, like going back to the chair, we still sit in chairs. This was invented. The Egyptians had chairs. We still cook with fire. Like
Yeah.
like I remember when we looked at product design history, there were the Italian futurists, and even in Buck Rogers movies, those old sci-fi where people didn't eat; they just had capsules. That never
Yeah.
happened. We still cook with bloody fire. We still like steaks, like we still like.
Yeah.
In fact, now it's the opposite. The artisanal ones are the expensive ones. You know what I mean? Where when it's really grown paleo way, that's what we want. So it's not like everything new. Yeah, I think that's where although we've moved on from Genlin, we also go back to it in the sense that when the new thing comes, it doesn't destroy it's not like a linear thing where I don't know if you want to touch the dynamite of political, but there's a certain thinking of the current generation that we got it. All the history, they're bad people because there was slavery. Plato had slaves, and you know what I mean. So they're all bad, and now it's us. But everyone made that same mistake. They always think that they're the end of history, but then people who think like this, they're the ones who create the world wars
Oh,
because they think
yeah.
they know everything. That's so
Yeah.
there's that, and I think going back to the last session we had, I think that's where the importance of keeping the dot 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 is important. We should always
Yeah.
think that we never get it because like to the young people, or not even young people, the people who condemn the people who came before us because we think they were bad. What do you think the people after us will think about us? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, like when Jordan Peterson says, when he reads stories about the Nazi Germany or the Gulag Archipelago, he doesn't think he's the hero or the victim. He tries to imagine, what if I was a perpetrator? And which is more likely because a lot of people cooperated with these regimes. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
if
yeah, yeah.
everyone
Well,
said no,
I,
they
I
wouldn't
live in
be able to
China.
do it. Yeah. What's that?
I live in China.
Yeah,
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 leave
yeah.
it at that. I live in
Yeah.
China. So yeah.
So, and now going back to lived experience phenomenology, because I'm a heavy user of social media and stuff, but I find that I still read printed books.
Yeah.
I still have time alone. I still meditate. So it doesn't mean that when new things come, you erase the old. Does it just layer on top? I don't know. What do you think? Does it just?
I think these are just part of the challenges of the 21st century. You know one of the things that underlies our sort of fundamental worldview is this sort of scientific, disenchanted world picture that, although they might claim that the only reality is a physical reality, in it, there's still this implicit split between the mental realm and the bodily realm, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's a bit like our mental realm is getting hijacked by this sort of mono focus on the sort of on our devices and the sort of
Yeah, yeah.
technological, right? Like, for instance, when I look at kids who are, say, younger than 7 or 8 years old, and they're fixed on their devices, and I think there's something not quite right about this, because
Yeah.
even though now the people will, you'll see companies that they'll advertise on TV. It's a great idea. We've got this like educational iPad game for kids who are 4 or 5. To keep them occupied, they learn something, blah blah blah. But actually, kids are much better in the beginning, especially when it comes to the development of the finer levels of cognition and imagination,
Mm,
to use their body and objects in the world. From going into these really evolutionary origins of human cognition and the evolutionary origins of language, and therefore the development of our conceptual life,
mm,
it happened in this very embodied, aesthetic,
mm,
affective, direct orientation towards and within this world, the actual, sensory
mm,
world that we live in. And as soon as you kind of like, the underlying assumption is that, intellectual development is somehow separate from or distinct from this sort of very embodied level of cognition, which, when you're doing like, choosing between menu items on some kind of educational app, and you're 4 or 5 years old, yeah, you're immediately, your energy is completely out of the body. You're in this
yeah.
completely, and this creates an energetic disconnect, and it also, I think, it potentially limits certain kind of cognitive imaginal development. Steiner once said that, like, higher imagination or spiritual imagination is intimately related to fine motor control.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And
You
and
know, and you think about like someone who's very good at piano, it makes a lot of sense. There's sort of very, very complicated and beautiful pieces of music that sort of express very, very intricate conceptual,
Yeah.
beauty, and is closely related to sort of very, very intricate fine motor control, right? So
Yeah, I agree. But I think one thing to keep in mind, and this is where I'm a bit more hopeful, is that this form
yeah, I'm not
factor,
that I'm not hopeful. There is still hope. But anyway, go on. Yes.
this form factor, this has been with us since the 70s. I think people think we've advanced so much, but if you look at what Alan Kay is saying, Alan Kay came up with the idea for the Dynabook back in the 70s in
Yeah.
in the Xerox Spark. That's where Steve Jobs saw the computer which he copied for the Mac. They had a mouse back then in the 70s,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so it was all there. And apparently, which is true, we still type programs in a text editor. We haven't really progressed. There's not yet we've been really riding on Moore's law. So
Yeah.
even coding a website, it's still bloody difficult at this day and age, which is ridiculous if you think about it, right? But
Yeah.
there's hope. I'll show you something. There's this guy called Brett Victor, and it's like a visionary, but it's also an outlier. We talked about outlier
Oh yeah. Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah.
and okay, so do you see the screen?
Yeah. I do.
Yeah. So the premise of Brett Victor is how do you create a computer that is not a screen so that people can be people. So he got this idea that like when the Americans sent people to the moon, the whole room was the computer, right? It was a whole control center. So he wants to create that the computer is the room and people
Right.
are then free to intermingle. So what's happening here is there are projectors on top, and
Okay.
they sense these colored things on the paper, and that's how they do their computing. So do you know what I mean? So people can look at
Yeah.
each other's faces. They can manipulate objects with their hands. They could use pens, and that's how they do their computing. So, and the beauty of this is then their artifacts remain in the room, right? And then you have a record over time. And then it's not apps, it's the only reason we have apps now is a commercial reason so that people can sell apps. Why do you need to
Yeah.
buy an app for every each thing we bloody do, right? It's
I
because
like
it's
this
it's not
analogy.
really
Agency, not
what's that?
apps. Agency,
Yeah,
not apps. I like that.
yeah. Because he used to work for Apple before, and then he had this Damascus moment. Like, what am I doing with my life? And then you know what I mean? He resigned and went like a hobo on a train and talked. Yeah, it's like the Buddha ascetic. He just thought about things and he programmed stuff. He played with stuff, and now he's doing this. It's a non-profit, so he's not doing a company.
Yeah, it's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, so there's
Agency, not
like it's that thinking like a whole human. So he has.
apps.
Yeah, I'll send you some links later so you could look at. He really has amazing talks as well and amazing he's been playing with how to do like he has these ladders of abstraction on on a web page and how you could I don't know why didn't the original design of the web it should be two-way. You should be able to manipulate the page, whereas now we're just reading it. You know what I mean? You should be able to change stuff as you open a web page. You
Yeah,
know,
look, it's exactly what we're talking about. People think with their hands, people think with
they
their
walk
body,
around. Yeah,
people think with their hands, people think with their bodies. This is absolutely true.
yeah. Think like whole humans, and it's a humane dynamic medium. So the computer of the future is not a product, but a place. So maybe I should change my title from product designer to place designer. It's
Right.
interesting. And he thinks
Yeah,
long
very
term.
cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah. All right. So I thought there's some hope in, and also I attended this talk of Helmut Esslinger. He was the designer of the early Macs,
Yeah,
the Apple II. And then he brought out his iPhone. He said, I hate what Steve Jobs did to this because we have 10 fingers and then he's forcing you to use one. Like, we have this whole body. We should be using the whole thing as for the
yeah,
interface.
yeah,
Not,
yeah.
and they have even the VR set. Why do you it should be
Well,
like,
yeah,
yeah, the whole
this
thing, right?
this is definitely one of my issues, like with the way VR development is going,
Yeah.
because from these underlying assumptions about how the brain works, how consciousness works, what cognition is, how perception works, we have this we're still working on the metaphor that everything is fundamentally computational somehow. The universe
Yeah.
is just one big thing, and everything is computational actually. So that when people go into, well, the current sort of level of virtual reality, the current realization of it, it's like uh, the world is rendered visually. There's some sound as well, so you get the audio cues which are kind of given that dimension. But the what you eliminate when you remediate the visual world within a digital sphere is the implicit.
Yeah.
Suddenly the implicit is no longer there, because the implicit comes from the body's direct being in the world. It's
Yeah.
instantaneous, always direct, prior to perception, being in the world. Our bodily implicit knowing and its orientation, it's like if yeah, if it didn't have this implicit knowing, we would fall out of our chairs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We would fall over and we wouldn't know where we are, So
Yeah. Like
um,
when I did my interaction design subject, then the teacher says, "What are the senses? Let's list them all." And people were stuck with five, and then he said, "There's a lot more if you really think about it." Like that's when I
yes,
learned proprioception. How do you know where you
proprioception,
are? Yeah,
interoception, all of that stuff, yeah.
yeah, and
And
also
our
like
sort of kinesthetic awareness of our
yeah,
bodily orientation in space.
yeah, like when you
Yeah,
close your eyes and then I touch it and someone else touch it. How do I know that it's me touching and not that? You know what I mean? We have a sense
yeah,
of, and also when this is beautiful to watch, maybe in Shanghai when it's I don't know, but when I was living in London, it's quite dense. But there's a way that people navigate to each other. So people have the sense. You know what I mean? You can't do that if you don't sense how you're moving through space.
so currently virtual reality kind of hijacks that sense
Right, right,
and places it in a world which has very sharp digital limits,
right.
right? There
Or
isn't this,
either
there
that
isn't
or
this
people go through the walls, right? It's either that.
yeah. So and no wonder at the moment there is a lot of issues around people who experience virtual reality and get sick. They get
Yeah.
nausea. It's like,
Because their proprioceptors are fucked, you know.
yeah, it's like hijacking that sense in a really, actually quite aggressive way. It's
Yeah.
really quite aggressive and invasive on our systems. That's not to say that there are other ways we could develop virtual reality that would um, be more sensitive to that. And I'm all
Yeah,
for that.
or we can have augmented reality where you still see the world, but then you just have layers of, I don't know,
Right.
information. Yeah.
So,
But that can also go overboard. So I think this
yeah,
is the
but
problem with when the internet was so wonderful when it was beginning,
yeah,
when people were more civil, there were no bots. You know what I mean? There were no
Yeah, I
like
think that's the
robots
other
that
thing.
hijack you. You know?
Right. That's the other thing about virtual reality too. Like you could get to the point like where you don't need real people anymore. You could just have bots to stand in for it. And you wouldn't even, maybe at certain point of realization, you wouldn't even know whether the people that you're interacting with in the virtual reality space are deep fakes or real people. And so this is a kind of, I feel like some people might say, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. But that's kind of predicated on this view that we're nothing more than sort of electrochemical impulses of sensory meat that just needs to be
Yeah.
stimulated and thrilled to be happy, right?
It's like
You
Wall
know,
E and Wall E meets the Matrix.
yeah, there's a real chance of like this sort of very abysmal kind of solipsism. You know, you could
Yeah.
quite possibly live an entire life surrounded by deep fakes and never know a real person, you know?
Or maybe it's just me. Maybe we're a bit different because prior to all this, we did decades of meditation, so we can somehow be in the world but not of it. So I was thinking, could it happen that um, you know that I know that I know kind of thing? Like, could we come to a time where everyone knows that what people post in social media is not real? So it's just like no one takes it at face value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like is it like who was that? I forgot the author's name, but this is like a postmodern thing that I can't say. Let's say I paraphrase it. I can't say uh, I love you like the raindrops because someone already said that. But what I can say is like what Ashok said in this movie. You know what I mean? Like we're cross-referencing in the sense that I
Right.
know that
Okay.
you're not always happy as what you show in your Instagram page, but I'm gonna say how are you anyway. You know what I mean? We know it's a game, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I think that
Yeah.
what the weird thing is sometimes I got sucked into this a few times when I'm into in this deep debate in a long thread in Facebook about an issue, and then suddenly I snapped out. Hang on, what am I doing? Do I really need to win this debate? Do you know what I mean? Like you get caught up in the.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit like Lucifer and Iron Man. Remember when we had that?
Yeah. Right.
This is kind of Lucifer and Iron Man against the material. Everything's material. While this is like everything's that shiny and the
Yeah.
simulacrum. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, like it is. There's that part of like being cut off from the implicit and that bodily sense is also sort of um, needing to receive. Like there's this assumption that like we're putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. All we need to do is like have all the pieces together, and then we've got it. And then,
Mm.
whereas the other view is like there's more, much more to the world that we don't know, and that uh, like part of it, like we could say, because we've had experience with it in meditation, is that level of the life force and the way the life force, of the world and our body kind of are intermingled and interact with each other.
Mm.
Um, and and so if people are completely immersed in a virtual environment, they're also cut off from that.
Mm.
And,
Or are they? Is it possible? Anyway, is it possible
well, I think it
to
is possible.
imbue this
I think
reality
it is
with some
possible.
presence? Yeah.
Right. It is. I really do think that it is possible.
Mm.
The only problem is we need to change the fundamental philosophical assumptions that are driving the development.
Yeah.
And whether they will change or not is the challenge.
But it could be a hype as well because we've went through these hype cycles. We go through hype cycles in AI, and everyone keeps saying that. But again, the question is this time going to be different? But one thing that's interesting is, C. elegans. The worm.
The what? Sorry.
There's a worm called C. elegans. So there's a scientist, a biologist
Uh,
said we need a model organism so that we can understand how life works. So
yeah.
this organism is it's quite simple, but it has all the things that we can do. It can move, it can react to the environment, it can reproduce. It has
Yeah.
I think it's 100 neurons. There's some paltry number of neurons. So this thing has been sequenced to death. We know each part of this worm, but people can't still understand how it all works. Even if we've not just dissected it, we've actually gone to the DNA, the protein level. We know the whole thing about this organism is mapped to the
Yeah.
death, but
Yeah.
we still don't know how it works, right? So it's that there's
Right.
still
Because
something there.
because as long as you ignore the phenomenological first person perspective, you're never going to know everything about um, like the what living, what feeling, what consciousness is. You know, you can't find out about the subjective by probing the object. You know.
Yeah. I'll just show you this interesting. I don't know if we could. Anyway, this is just the first thing that came out of when I googled it. See that they've wired the the actual how each neuron is linked to each other. Look at how complex that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So this is like, you know, what we could call
Worm
this like
wiring.
easy problem of consciousness, where we can map neural correlates and what they're associated with right down to the nth degree. We can map that, but it will still not tell us anything about its subjective experience. I mean, we cannot, it won't give us that picture. Like, for instance, with the example of a human being dreaming, right? What
Right.
if you were the only person who ever dreams, and no one else knew what you were talking about when you say, "Oh, look, when I go to sleep, I have this experience where I dream that this, that, and that," and everyone else is like, "What the fuck is a dream? I don't know. What are you talking about?" So, but then, okay, some scientist goes, "Okay, well, let's study this, right?" So then they hook your brain up to an MRI and or EEG or whatever. They'll ever get out of it is data. They will never
Yeah.
get you. They'll never get the dreams. You know, they'll never get
Yeah.
the experience of the dreams. They'll only get the data. They'll only get finer and finer and finer data. Like, it'll all be facts and figures about what's going on in the brain when you're apparently dreaming, right? But how do
Yeah.
you make the leap between that and the actual experience, the first person direct experience of dreaming,
Yeah.
right?
There's that. I don't know if they discuss this in your class or in your subjects, where it's a thought experiment. What if there's it's a bit like zombie humans. They
Yeah,
behave exactly like us, but they're not self-aware.
yeah.
How would that be? Are they then? What are they? It's gonna be
What are they?
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think
So
Jenkin
that's the
refers
argument.
to the Turing test, right? The
Right,
Turing
right.
test assumes that if you can just translate as if it behaves like a human, then
Then it must be
then
a human.
but
If
we
it,
know it's not. You know what I mean? It's not. We can tell.
yeah. Actually, one of the papers that I linked to you that I wrote was addressing that very problem. I don't know if you had the time to get
Not
around to
quite.
reading
But
it.
give us
Not quite.
a brief.
All right. Let me see if I can just ring it up here. I can read straight from it.
Yeah, and if you want, you can share your
Uh,
screen. There's a screen share on the.
oh, is there? Actually, I've opened it in a different browser. So hang on. Maybe
That's
if I can
fine.
try and.
But if not, you can just
Uh,
read. It's the same. Yeah.
yeah, I'll just read it for now. Hang on. Just opening it up now.
Which one is this one?
Okay, so this paper is called Descartes' Language Argument, versus physicalism and the consequences for AI and universal grammar? A short answer.
Okay, I think maybe I
So,
have.
I don't know how much to read. Let's see. Oh yeah, I might as well just start from the beginning and read. Okay, so Descartes' language argument asserts that without the understanding provided by mind as the seat of human reason, the body as mere physical mechanism, excuse me, body as mere physical mechanism could never acquire nor command language. It's not possible that a machine, no matter how perfect, nor that it may exceed human performance in certain tasks, truly possess the internal workings which furnish it with the necessary wherewithal, such that it responds to life situations, as would a human mind. Physicalism refutes this argument. The brain is indeed mechanism, but mental processes are simply brain processes. In principle, then, artificial intelligence, and by this we mean strong AI,
General or general.
machine capable of thinking like a human being.
Yeah.
So, artificial intelligence is eminently possible, since thought and language are derived from mechanistic nature. Indeed, vigorous pursuit of viable AI is predicated on this view, following Turing, that given sufficient computational power, imitating human responses is sufficient for a machine to be considered thinking. It also draws substantial theoretical justification from Chomsky's cognitive psycholinguistics, or universal grammar. That is, human language is modular, genetically innate, and fundamental universal in its recursive grammatical symboling.
Maybe later
Human
you could
thought.
you could unpack that Chomsky. That's something I don't really understand. But what's his argument?
Okay, so universal grammar is the idea that human language sort of like came from a genetic mutation just suddenly, and that it's universal, and it's been a while since I've studied it, so I can't remember off the top of my head.
Maybe we can come back to
Well, I
that in the
can't.
next one. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's sort of in this paper that it goes into it a little bit more. So human thought is thus computational, and as such can be fully emulated or similarly realized by our machines. However, the physicalist position presented here is not a well-founded refutation of Descartes' language argument, but not because Descartes is correct in his ultimate thesis of substance dualism, pitting the mind as a separate ontological entity over and above the mechanistic physical body. So the argument, as I present it, need not depend on a dualist position to refute physicalism. Specifically then, Descartes' language argument holds insofar as it asserts there is an experiential ground to human understanding and, crucially, all its response to all the occurrences of life, which brute mechanism cannot capture. Descartes encloses experiencing within his concept of subject as separated rational mind entity, whereas physicalism ignores this experiencing altogether. It's tacitly superfluous in its conflation with subject as concept. There is only mechanism. Hence, Descartes' concept of objective externality is also retained as if wholly complete in itself, though now devoid of the definite thinking subject from which it starts. Okay, maybe I should get on to the point where it's talking about the where it's sort of relevant to what we're saying.
Is that the Chinese room thought, or is that different?
Yeah, the Chinese room. Yeah. So okay. So on AI, Descartes' argument is prescient, preempting Searle. Thinking is more than just a matter of manipulating meaningless symbols. It also involves meaningful semantic contents. These semantic contents are what we mean by meaning. This Searle illustrates with his Chinese room thought experiment, whereby, like a computer following programmed instructions, no understanding is required or occurs in order to translate the Chinese words. AI believers are happy to seek recourse in some model of distributed processing and emergent mental properties, like neural networks. But in any case, the belief amounts to this. From meaningless syntactic abstraction, meaning will somehow spring forth, such that it is concretely felt by a resultant, definite, concrete, intentional subject, or the idea that thermostats have belief. Searle also notes the pervasive dualism alongside its denial, an incoherence, uh, an incoherence to standard AI theory in its purely formal conception of thinking, devoid of any bodily origin. Ergo, brain as sophisticated information processing storage unit does not compute. Okay, here's the
Right,
Gendlin bit. It's missing the direct actuality of embodied felt experiencing that we inhabit and to which the world is made available accordingly. There again, we have affordances. An implicit understanding of situation where contextual body world possibilities include and function in our explicit cognitive acts and symbols, yet naturally always carries more than our statements can say alone.
Yeah.
No pre-established logical framework of functional contingencies, no matter how sophisticated, in simulation can duplicate this. So Jacob's language argument seems rather more confirmed than denied, if this is what physicalism amounts to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so it ties in back to Gendlin and affordances, implicit understanding, and the way that like the idea is that the assumption is that somehow from meaningless syntactic abstraction, this definite intentional subject emerges, as a result, and then feels meaning. And this is kind of a strange assumption to have, I think. I argue.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe it's possible to create a different kind of intelligence, but not exactly a human intelligence if you don't have a human body, right?
Right.
In the same way that we can never be a dolphin intelligence because we're not dolphins, right? You know what I mean? Something like
Yeah. Well, the way I see it is that it'll always be a program. It will always have this. Where is it in the paper? Like, hang on. Uh,
but
no
there's
pre-established logical framework of functional contingencies, no matter how sophisticated in simulation, can duplicate this. So it's missing the implicit.
yeah, although Kevin Kelly wrote a book back in the 90s called Out of Control, and he talked about how the born and the made, because there's the born biological and the made, they're
Yeah.
like crossing, What's happening is the things that we make are approaching lifelike qualities in terms of complexity.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're engineering the born with genetic engineering. So, but I think the title of the book is Out of Control. And I think what it's saying is it may be possible to create artificial life, artificial intelligence, but once you've done that, then it's out of your control because by definition, if it becomes intelligent, it has autonomy. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then that's where it will have subjectivity and it will act. You cannot
Yeah.
control it.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that this still depends on that somehow consciousness needs to be, a subject needs to be emergent out of some kind of, substrate or functional arrangement of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And yeah.
so actually, I would reverse this the other way around. And say that our devices, even the primitive ones, are like extensions of our cognition. They're like an extended mind, right? And they have consciousness insofar as they are like our mental widgets realized as extensions of mind, and then they become more and more sophisticated. So they reflect like a mirror our psychology, and that this can get very subtle, on the level of the astral, right? They start to incarnate entities. They start to
Oh,
become like uh, subtle enough that they take on a certain astral life of their own.
could be, yeah,
Uh,
because
so
that's
this would
certainly
be more,
happening on the level of corporations, right? The memes and
yeah.
stuff.
This would this would be very much in line with, say, an animist view, like how a lot of tribal societies have. Like
Right.
everything is alive. You know,
Just like in the
and
like in the Dune universe is the abomination, the Gola, like the yeah.
yeah,
And what was I gonna say? But I think maybe we can also distinguish between intelligence and consciousness, because like in a way, a calculator is already more intelligent than me when it comes to addition, subtraction, and all those kind of intelligence.
right.
And
But there's no
Google,
understanding. It
it's
doesn't
not
understand
it's
what you're doing.
intelligent in intelligence in a certain way, but not conscious, right? So it's like it's not
Yeah,
self-aware, right? Not that we
yeah.
know, because it's not
So
communicated. There's always that question. Maybe they just don't know how to tell us that they're self-aware. Like this comes with when it comes to animals, right? Apparently, yeah. I think I'm gonna read this book about octopus. Apparently, they're really, really intelligent. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. But then
strange.
again, animals
Like
they also, in the Gemini universe, they also interacting in the environment, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
But can robots be then? That's another question, because robots can interact with the environment, right? So it's not just in the computer, but
Yeah,
you have physical robots,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Again, like currently, I think most of the research is still based on this functionalist idea of pre-programmed contingencies, and we can just like create a database, ever expanding database of
No, no,
contingencies.
I think we've moved beyond that now with the Roomba, and it's actually an Aussie who created that. The
Yeah,
vacuum thing. That has like cockroach level intelligence. Like you don't pre-program the path it's gonna take.
yeah. I mean, a lot of machine
Yeah,
learning, or like that kind of thing, where it learns from
yeah,
its environment and stuff. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But actually, the Roomba, or it could be, it's in a weird kind of way. You go back to Tantra and in the Kabbalah, where desire is what creates life. So in a way, if you program a robot to desire dust, it will find ways of getting the dust. So you don't tell it what to do, but you I
Yeah,
think,
but it
yeah.
still requires the programmer at the beginning. Yeah,
No, but you're not telling it what to do, but you're instilling
yeah,
a
exactly.
desire. Yeah. But I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
this is where I'm hopeful with AI is we can learn what it means to be human, because some people are gloomy about it, but I think I'm positive about it, because it's a process of elimination. If being human, because we've already been defeated in chess, in Go, by machines, but is chess playing and Go playing, is that what defines us as human? Maybe not. So you keep going up, and then as more and more things get done by machines, then we go, this still really what makes us human, right? Isn't that a good thing? Like we lose factory jobs, but isn't that okay, because are humans meant to work in a factory in the first place? You know what I mean? I'm
Well,
hopeful, yeah.
yeah, 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 for sure.
And we're also like training ourselves to be gods, because are we gonna create these new things in our image, like our myth that we were created in the image of the one who created us? It's kind of interesting. It's like
It is
it's
very interesting.
recursive, right?
Recursive is a good word for it, actually.
Yeah. Cool. Do you want to talk about your startup? Just to relax before we call it a night.
Oh yeah, so I mean, it was quite accidental.
Mm.
I just found out through a mutual friend that there was a company that was looking for someone that could help them, because I'm moving in Shanghai, so it's a Chinese company. They were looking for someone to help them kind of reach an audience outside of China in a way that was made sense. uh, and like help with their media and social media or whatever. And so it's a crypto project. They're
Oh,
starting a
okay.
new exchange, a crypto
Right.
exchange. But the difference with this one is that well, the first iteration is a normal exchange. The next iteration will be a decentralized exchange that will run as a Lisk sidechain. So Lisk is a particular cryptocurrency that
Yep.
is a platform for JavaScript and
Right.
TypeScript developers. So developers who already know JavaScript can develop decentralized applications on the Lisk platform, and it's developed in such a way that it's scalable. Uh, all the different projects that use it as a platform can, do cross-chain transactions and all this kind of
So
stuff.
is it creating its own blockchain, or is it running on top of Ethereum or Holochain or something
Oh
like
no,
that?
it's its own blockchain. So Lisk
Yeah.
is its own like mainnet,
Yeah.
main chain, and then the issue with like for instance the issue that plagues Ethereum is scalability, right? And they're working on that in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Um,
They're coming up with a
also
new. Yeah.
with Bitcoin too, like how's it scale? Do we change the block size, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and then people fork it
So,
after a while.
yeah, or you fork it. So the Lisk solution is to have side chains. So you have the side chains that are they're not, so it's not printing directly to the main chain, but the side chains all communicate with the main chain, and they can communicate with each other. And they work as individual blockchain. They're their own blockchain. Hence,
So how do you solve the problem of which one is the trusted record? You know what I mean? Like if there's a what if they're conflicting side chains?
but they have a consensus mechanism for that. Like it's
In their
runs
own
on
chain.
yeah. Yeah, if you make a side chain, you're your own blockchain, but it interacts with the main chain of Lisk, and then through that interaction with Lisk, it can do cross chain um, transactions
Oh.
between the various side chains on the platform.
The,
Um,
for example, there'll be a side chain in Shanghai, for example, and you're doing that. And there's be a side chain in Sydney. And if
yeah,
Sydney and Shanghai want to transact, we go through the main chain. Is that how it works?
yeah, something like that. Something like that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Um, Yeah. So anyway, at the moment, their Lisk is on the verge of releasing its first like alpha version of the software developers kit
Cool.
SDK, so that developers can
JavaScript, a scum of age.
working on making apps, decentralized apps in JavaScript instead of having to learn yet another new language. And yeah, so um, when that's developed, when they have a full version, working version of the SDK for JavaScript, then the company that I'm working for is going to make their own sidechain driven decentralized exchange for the Lisk network, so that whenever new tokens are developed, new sidechains are developed on Lisk, that exchange will be the first exchange that they're listed on and things like that.
Okay.
So that's the idea for it. It's
So if
still
it's JavaScript, yeah, will it run in the browser or will it be a Node.js kind of thing?
yeah, I mean, there'll be all sorts of services. Like, for instance, one of the companies that are going to build on Lisk as a sidechain, they have their own token. It's Lisk machine learning, so they're doing machine learning as a blockchain, and they're going to do that um, on the Lisk network.
Machine learning as a
So
blockchain. It's interesting.
yeah, yeah. Machine learning on the blockchain. They're going to do that. So
Mm.
uh,
Sorry, I just have
yeah,
this reaction when people mix buzzwords. You just go, when
yeah.
it's a blockchain with Internet of Things with the cloud and
Well, yeah, it's funny because then another one of the newest listings is also like a blockchain for Internet of Things. Actually, it's quite necessary because one of the problems with an Internet of Things is like different objects have very different capabilities in terms of
yeah. Or you
processing.
actually need a common protocol really that's secure and encrypted. Yeah.
Yeah, and also for privacy reasons as well.
Yeah.
So
You need
the
strong
blockchain,
encryption. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I mean,
Early days. Early days.
early days. If anyone's interested, the exchange is called Elite X, so it's elitex.io.
Mm.
Um, and I've written a few articles on Medium for them about
Cool.
some listings, about the aims of the exchange, a bit more technical detail about Lisk and sidechain stuff.
Crypto is big in China, right? It's massive there, right?
Yeah, it is. It's huge. It's a very interesting relationship, though, because, of course, the Chinese government have pretty much shut it down completely.
Have they? Because most of the miners are in China, right?
Yeah, most of the miners are still here. They haven't shut that down yet. They're just not very friendly to cryptocurrency, and they're not very friendly to ICOs, but China likes blockchain.
Okay.
So if you
Yeah.
use the right language, it's okay. We're not doing an ICO. We're not a
We're
cryptocurrency. We're a blockchain project, and then it's okay.
yeah, we're just you're investing in us. I don't know. I don't know what,
Yeah,
and then the whole thing would change with Libra and Facebook. Okay, interesting. Well, it's an interesting landscape to watch for sure. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I never really thought I would be that involved in it, but the opportunity came up, and they needed someone who knew a little bit about it, and who spoke English and could help them, reword their material to make it, readable and available to an audience
It's
outside.
good. I might have a read. Yeah.
Yeah.
Add to the pile of things to read. Never ends.
Yeah, they're much more light reading. I mean, a little bit technical because it's about blockchain, right? But more like
Yeah.
light reading compared to this philosophical stuff we've been discussing.
Yeah, but the philosophy is more fun, even though it's hard.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
anyway, it's life. All right. Maybe we should call this one. Any last things you wanna say?
Uh, I think no. Oh, Genlin. Everyone should read a little bit of Genlin. I think he's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
I really,
yeah.
yeah,
I'll
he
read more for
resolves a
next
lot
week,
of
and maybe we can introduce you.
going.
Yeah, I just brought up. I just also maybe if you have you read Integral Ken Wilber? It's also interesting.
I know a little bit
It's
about
in the
Ken
same
Wilber, but I
vein of
haven't read that. Yeah.
yeah. I'm still slowly reading it, and where I haven't finished it, but one thing that's common with Jalen is he's talking about transcend and include. He's talking about he's using the developmental
Excellent, yeah.
model in yeah. So he's using the developmental model in individual human into humanity as a whole. Like we're going to different stages. It doesn't mean that when you go to the next stage, you just erase you include what's you learned from there, and yeah, it's interesting
Yeah.
as well. And yeah, it's also a path out of the postmodern hell we're finding ourselves in at the moment. We can
Yeah.
talk about that next time. It will be like
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
open
we should,
because
probably should.
I saw a tweet you had about your academic intrigues.
Oh yeah. That was funny because that
That will
really
be
came out of
fun next
nowhere. It had
time.
nothing to do with the debate, but it just threw a shit in this in the a shit spanner in the works.
Yeah, I guess then everything's political and everything's about identity. But we meditators, of course, know what is identity.
All right.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Ashok,
Yeah.
and I'll see you
No
next
problem.
week. And
Yeah. See you next week. And yeah, this has been great. It's a lot of fun. We're kind of just
yeah, let's
winging,
continue. We're in a
free,
row.
you know,
Dot
discussing all
dot
sorts.
dot.
Yeah. Dot. Yeah, actually, there's some other Genlin papers I should send to you as well. Like, you know, if you ever get the chance to deep dive on Genlin, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I'm slowly digesting through them, and yeah, and then once we've driven, then we could move on. Maybe we can move to the red book at some stage.
It's huge.
Jung is interesting too. Yeah. And we can talk novels as well. As I told you, I just finished reading Crime and Punishment. It's amazing. Dostoevsky's just like so talk about genius in terms of abstraction, but in terms of existentialism and cool. I think even this episode is becoming dot dot dot. We don't know where to end.
All right. Well, I'll just say goodbye and thank you, and we'll talk again.
再见.
Again.
All right. 再见.